Hi everyone. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Today we're going to embark on a terrifying journey through different cultures, exploring some of the scariest horror stories from around the world. But before we begin, I want to know, what is the scariest horror story you've ever heard? Share it in the comments, and let's discover together what lies ahead.
The Cursed Painting of Italy. I had always been an art enthusiast, so when I heard about a mysterious painting that was said to be cursed, I was intrigued. The painting was housed in an old, abandoned mansion in a small town in Italy. They said it had driven its previous owners mad, and that anyone who looked at it too long would meet the same fate. I arrived at the mansion just before dusk, the sky tinged with red as the sun began to set. The mansion was in a state of decay, the windows boarded up and the doors hanging off their hinges. I pushed my way inside, air thick with dust and the smell of mildew. The painting was in the grand hall, covered by a thick black cloth. My heart raced as I approached it, the stories of its curse swirling in my mind. But I was determined to see it for myself. With a deep breath, I pulled the cloth away. The painting was beautiful, depicting a serene landscape with rolling hills and a bright blue sky. But there was something off about it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out what was wrong. The longer I looked, the more uneasy I felt. The colors seemed to shift, sky darkening, and the hills twisting into grotesque shapes. My head began to pound, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. My eyes were glued to the painting, my mind spiraling into darkness. The landscape had become a nightmarish scene, filled with twisted trees and shadowy figures that seemed to move on their own. And then I saw it. Figure standing in the distance, watching me. It was small at first, but it grew larger, closer, until it was right in front of me, staring back at me from the canvas. I screamed and stumbled back, the room spinning around me. Painting fell to the floor with a crash, the glass shattering. But when I looked at it again, the figure was gone. The landscape returned to its original state. I fled the mansion, my mind reeling, but the image of that figure haunted me, burned into my memory. Couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching me, even now. And then, one night, I looked out my window and saw it standing in my yard, staring up at me with cold, unblinking eyes.
The Phantom Train of Russia. Growing up, I had always heard stories of the phantom train that haunted the Siberian Railway. They said it appeared out of nowhere, a ghostly locomotive that brought doom to anyone who saw it. Most dismissed it as a myth, but I was always curious. One winter, I found myself traveling through Siberia on a research trip. The journey was long and cold, the train cutting through vast stretches of snow-covered wilderness. As night fell, the temperature dropped and the passengers huddled in their seats, trying to keep warm. I was staring out the window, lost in thought, when I saw something strange in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as it got closer, I realized it was another train, an old, dilapidated locomotive, its carriages shrouded in fog. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't look away. The train was moving parallel to ours, its windows dark and empty. It seemed to glide over the tracks, silent and ominous. I turned to the other passengers, but no one else seemed to notice. I watched in horror as the phantom train drew closer, headlights piercing the darkness. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized it was heading straight for us. Just as it was about to collide with our train, it vanished, leaving nothing but an eerie silence in its wake. The passengers around me continued as if nothing had happened, but I knew what I had seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of the ghostly train haunted my thoughts. I kept telling myself it was just a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by the cold and fatigue. But the next morning, when I looked out the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the tracks beside us, were the twisted, rusted remains of a train that had derailed years ago, exactly where I had seen the phantom train. And then I realized with growing dread that our train was on the same track.
The Faceless Man of Canada. There was a story that circulated in my small town in Canada about a faceless man who wandered the forests at night. They said he was once a man who had lost everything. his family, his home, his identity. And now he roamed the woods, searching for a face to replace the one he had lost. One evening, after a long day of hiking, I found myself lost in the dense woods. The sun had set, and the trees cast long, menacing shadows across the path. I tried to retrace my steps, but the forest seemed to twist and turn, leading me deeper into the darkness. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shapes in the shadows. Suddenly, I heard a low, rasping breath behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickened my pace, desperate to find my way out of the woods. But the breathing grew louder, closer. I could feel eyes on me, but whenever I looked, there was nothing there. Panic set in as I broke into a run, the darkness closing in around me. I tripped over a root and fell to the ground, my flashlight rolling away. In the dim light, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was a man, tall and thin, with no face. He took a step towards me, and I scrambled to my feet, backing away in terror. The faceless man moved silently, his head tilted as if he was listening to something only he could hear. I turned and ran, branches whipping at my face, the sound of his footsteps echoing behind me. I didn't stop until I burst out of the woods, collapsing on the road. I looked back, expecting to see him following me, but the woods were empty. I was safe, or so I thought. But that night, as I lay in bed, I felt a presence in my room. I opened my eyes and saw him standing at the foot of my bed, his faceless head turned towards me. He reached out, and before I could scream, everything went black. When I woke up, I was alone. Something was wrong. My face felt strange, numb. I stumbled to the mirror, and what I saw made my blood run cold. I had no face.
The Shadow of the Philippines. I had always heard stories of dark spirits that haunted the remote islands of the Philippines. They said these spirits, known as shadow beings, could latch onto a person, slowly draining their life until nothing remained but an empty shell. During a trip to a small, isolated island, I found myself curious about these tales. The locals warned me not to wander the island alone at night, but I was too intrigued to listen. One evening, I ventured out, the air thick with humidity and the sound of the jungle all around me. As I walked, I felt a strange presence, as if something was following me, just out of sight. I turned around several times, but there was nothing there. Only darkness and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. But the feeling grew stronger, more oppressive. My heart raced as I quickened my pace, but no matter how fast I walked, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The shadows around me seemed to stretch and grow, taking on ominous shapes. I finally reached the edge of the jungle, where the trees thinned out and the moonlight illuminated the path. But as I stepped into the clearing, I saw it, a dark figure, standing motionless in the shadows. It was tall, impossibly thin, with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was watching me, its gaze piercing through the night. I froze, fear gripping me, but I couldn't look away. The shadow began to move, gliding silently across the ground towards me. I stumbled back, but it was too late. The darkness enveloped me, suffocating me, pulling me into its cold embrace. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My vision blurred, and I felt my strength draining away, like my very soul was being sucked out of my body. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the shadow's face, a twisted, malevolent grin. When I woke up, I was lying on the beach, the sun rising in the distance. I was alive, but something was wrong. I felt weak, hollow, as if a part of me was missing. I returned to the village, but the locals wouldn't look at me. They muttered prayers and crossed themselves as I passed, whispering that I had been marked by the shadow. As the days passed, I noticed a darkness growing inside me. I was tired all the time, unable to sleep, haunted by nightmares of the shadow. And then one night, I looked in the mirror and saw it standing behind me, its eyes glowing with that same malevolent grin. I knew then that the shadow had claimed me. I was no longer myself, but something else, something dark and twisted. And soon I would be nothing more than a shadow too.
The Red Room of South Korea. I had always been skeptical of urban legends, especially those involving the internet. But when I heard about the Red Room, a accursed website that was said to doom anyone who visited it, I couldn't resist the temptation to see if it was real. The legend was simple. If you visited the website, a red pop-up would appear asking, "Do you like the Red Room?" If you closed the pop-up, you would receive a visit from a vengeful spirit that would haunt you until you died. One night, out of sheer boredom, I decided to test the legend. I found the website easily enough, a simple page with nothing but a red background. I waited for a few moments, but nothing happened. Feeling foolish, I was about to close the browser when the pop-up appeared. Do you like the Red Room? My heart skipped a beat, but I laughed it off and closed the pop-up. The screen went black for a moment, and then my computer shut down. I shrugged, thinking it was just a glitch, and went to bed. But that night, I had the most vivid nightmare of my life. I was in a dark, endless room, the walls stained with blood. A figure stood in the corner, its face hidden in shadow, watching me with cold, lifeless eyes. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. The dream had felt so real, but I tried to shake it off. I went about my day, trying to forget about it, but the feeling of unease lingered. That evening, as I was about to go to bed, I noticed something strange. My computer was on, even though I hadn't touched it since the night before. The screen was blank, but as I approached, the same red pop-up appeared. Do you like the Red Room? Fear gripped me as I tried to close the pop-up, but it wouldn't go away. The screen flickered, and the same dark figure from my dream appeared on the monitor, its eyes boring into mine. I could feel its presence in the room, cold and malevolent. I backed away, but the figure stepped out of the screen, its form becoming more solid with each step. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. The room grew darker, the air thick with dread as the figure loomed over me. And then it spoke, its voice a low, guttural whisper. You should have liked the Red Room. The last thing I remember was the feeling of icy hands closing around my throat. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor, the sun streaming through the window. My computer was off, and the pop-up was gone. But I knew it wasn't over. Every night since, I've had the same nightmare, the figure getting closer each time. And each morning, I wake up with the same words echoing in my mind. You should have liked the Red Room.
The Howling Dog of China. In my rural village in China, there was an old legend about a dog that would howl every night before someone died. They said the dog was a spirit, cursed to wander the earth, forever mourning the loss of its master. I never believed the stories, but that changed one fateful night. It was a cold, windy evening, and I was alone in my small house at the edge of the village. The wind howled through the trees, and the branches scratched against the windows, creating an eerie atmosphere. I was just about to go to bed when I heard it. A low, mournful howl that seemed to come from the distance. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. My heart raced as I realized it was a dog, howling with such sorrow that it sent shivers down my spine. The villagers always said that hearing the howling dog was a bad omen, a sign that death was near. I tried to ignore it, but the howling continued, growing louder and more desperate. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over me. It felt like the dog was right outside my door, calling out to me. Unable to stand it any longer, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The wind whipped around me, and the night was pitch black, but the howling continued, guiding me towards the edge of the village. I followed the sound until I reached an old, abandoned house that had been empty for years. The door was slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. The howling was louder now, almost deafening. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open and shone my flashlight inside. The beam illuminated the dusty, decaying interior. And there, in the middle of the room, was the dog. It was a large black dog with matted fur and eyes that glowed in the darkness. Its howling stopped as soon as I entered, and it turned to look at me with an expression that I could only describe as sorrowful. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. The dog didn't move, just watched me with those sad, glowing eyes. And then, without warning, it lunged at me. I stumbled back, but the dog passed right through me, vanishing into the darkness. I was left standing alone in the empty house, my heart racing. I fled back to my home, shaken and terrified. I couldn't sleep that night, haunted by the memory of the dog's sorrowful eyes. The next morning, the village was in an uproar. One of the elders had passed away in the night, his death sudden and unexpected. And as I heard the news, I realized the howling dog had been a warning, a harbinger of death. But I was the only one who had heard it. Now, every night, I hear the dog's mournful howl, growing louder and more desperate. And I know that soon, it will come for me too.
Thank you for watching, especially to the subscribers for supporting our stories. What story do you like the most? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling tales. See you in the next video. Make sure to come back tomorrow for another new video.